Welcome once again to a closer look at the text, that teaching portion of our Bible study, Sisters in Scripture. And today we get into the New Testament, and we get to do it in the company of a marvelous woman, Elizabeth. But first, let's lay some foundation. We began in the Hebrew Scriptures by looking at those four literary strands that were woven together in building the story, the Yahwist, the Elohist, the Deuteronomist, and the priestly. So let's take a minute to consider the four authors of our Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that together will create the heart of the New Testament. Now, we're in much more familiar territory here, but I think it's important to kind of, again, lay the foundation so we have that in common. As you may know, Matthew, Mark, and Luke are referred to as the Synoptic Gospels. Synoptic comes from the two words in Greek, syn, S-Y-N, meaning the same, as in a synonym, and optic for the eye, so that is seen with the same eye when we look at Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Mark was probably written in about 65, the year 65, and then Matthew and Luke were written about 20 years later, around the year 85, and they had access to Mark, so they incorporate that into their versions, as well as another source that is no longer existent as far as we know. It would be great to discover it, would it not? But this body of work is called by Bible scholars Q for kill, Q-U-E-L-L-E in German. And so Matthew and Luke are using Mark and Q to create their Gospels, and together these synoptic Gospels have somewhat different versions of many of the same stories, same miracles, teachings of Jesus. But the fourth Gospel, John, is quite different. It was written probably around the year 100, and possibly even later, some scholars think. And it has much less of the shared material. It has some of that in there, but a good portion of it is unique to John. If we take a look at how each of these four Gospels starts, that tells us something from the get-go. Now, Mark has a very sudden beginning with John the Baptist arriving on the scene in the desert and saying, "Prepare the way of the Lord," which right there gives us a little clue as to how important John the Baptist is. But he does not have anything before the adult ministry of Jesus. However, both Matthew and Luke do provide us with infancy narratives, somewhat different ones. Matthew goes back to the genealogy of Jesus, his family lineage, the Jewish connection all the way from Abraham through to David and down to Jesus, to show him as connected with the larger story and promises within the Jewish tradition. Then Matthew gives us some details of the story that are unique to Matthew. So we have, for instance, it's kind of told from Joseph's side of the story as opposed to Mary's side. We have the dream of Joseph. We have the arrival of the Magi from the east. We have the flight into Egypt, and of course that troubling scene of Herod having the children of Jerusalem murdered. So like the Elohist, you'll find the dream theme coming up in Matthew. And we have a little bit, not only the Joseph side of the story, but some dark elements to the birth of Jesus. Luke, on the other hand, is going to give us 2 full chapters to the infancy narratives. Like Mark, he starts with John the Baptist. But in this case, he sets up 2 parallel birth narratives, one for John the Baptist and one for Jesus. Each one has an annunciation. Each one has a miracle pregnancy. In one, it is postmenopausal, and in the other, it is of a virgin. And both have a marvelous canticle in them, that is to say, a poem or song of praise about this miracle. And then Luke has his own details, which are somewhat different. We have Caesar Augustus proclaiming a census. We have the journey to Bethlehem and Jesus being born in a stable. Angels appear and sing to the shepherds. And later we'll have Mary and Joseph take Jesus to the temple for the presentation, meeting up with Anna and Simeon, who recognize him for who he is. And then a second time at the temple when Jesus is older, and we have that episode where he gets disconnected from his parents and remains in the temple. So Luke gives a pretty significant body of work to this whole early years of Jesus. John, on the other hand, starts, "In the beginning was the Word." So we have a dramatic echoing of the very start of the Bible itself, in the beginning. So John is giving notice that he's not placing the historical Jesus for us. He is giving us Jesus in the context of the divine plan. And that difference in tone and purpose is going to continue throughout John's Gospel. As we work with these texts, I think you'll begin to get a little more sense for the relative outlook, the context, the Sitz im Leben, if you will, the purpose and the audience that each evangelist has in mind. Well, just as 2 of the 4 Gospels begin with John the Baptist, our study of the New Testament is going to begin with his mother. We're going to start with Elizabeth, and it's very fitting that we should do so. She stands, as it were, with a foot in both Testaments. She is, of course, a Jewish woman, and she stands in the line of the matriarchs. She shares many parts of their story are her story. Like Sarah, she has a child in her old age. Like Hagar and Rebecca, there is a promise of a child, an annunciation of a coming child. Like Rachel, she longs for a child, and that longing is later fulfilled. And like Naomi in her relationship with Ruth, Elizabeth in her relationship with Mary, there's that similarity that we've already touched upon, where the older and the younger woman complement one another and bring about God's purposes in the world. So she is very much in that wonderful, rich, long line of matriarchs as a Jewish woman. She is also, however, our introduction, our springboard into the New Testament, because she, like her son John, is a prophet. In fact, we could say it's not surprising John's a prophet. I think he took after his mother. She is the first person in the New Testament to recognize Jesus as the Lord. For when Mary arrives on her doorstep, she says, "Who am I that the mother of my Lord should come to me?" And she feels the child in her womb leap for joy in recognition of the child in Mary's womb as the Messiah. So she recognizes and proclaims the importance of Jesus long before anyone else gets it. She also proclaims the favor of Mary. She says, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb." She proclaims the faithfulness of Mary when she says, "Blessed is she who believed that the Lord's promises to her would be fulfilled." So she stands tall here and looks into the future, the significance of the arrival of this child. She gets it. So she's, like I say, a bridge between the two, very much standing with a foot in each world. You know, I do a kind of Advent retreat frequently where I bring up pictures, show them on a screen, of different ways that artists throughout the centuries have portrayed this coming together of Mary and Elizabeth. You know, many of us have prayerfully considered this event. It's the second mystery of the Rosary. For those who pray the Rosary, you know, we think about this, and it's become woven into our prayer life. Every time an artist decides how to portray it, they make choices about, you know, were they seated or standing or touching or embracing or from afar or inside or outside, and they begin to put flesh, so to speak, on their ideas. Sometimes Mary and Elizabeth look more like 16th century Italian women because that was where the artist was, and that was the audience for whom he was painting. That was his simile. Sometimes they're very contemporary. But what that shows us, I think, is that the artist was essentially making the same kind of choices as the author artist, the evangelist, was making in how to craft the story. And that mindset, that lens, helps us a lot as we consider the stories ahead of us and what is their setting. This particular story is, I think, an icon for women. We see in these two women coming together in the way that they do, that same collaborative way that Ruth and Naomi came together, where the young one hastens to the aid of the older one as soon as she hears the news, and the older woman affirms for the younger woman what she is going through. She says, "Blessed are you for believing in God's promises." She understands before even the need for Mary to explain. So I think we've all had that kind of experience where there are other women in our lives who validate our worth, who recognize our dreams, who in our coming together, there's a Christ moment, a Christ event. So we look at this meeting between Mary and Elizabeth and identify with that as sacred and affirming of our own stories as well. So do enjoy flipping the story next week and looking at it from Mary's side. I do challenge you to see Mary with fresh eyes. You will be enriched and blessed by doing that and by affirming the other women in your group and their take on this story. So thank you for joining us. Until next week, God bless.